A woman once told me that rocks don't lie. People do. Banks do. Husbands who promise you the world and then take it back piece by piece until you're standing on courthouse steps in the rain holding a deed to land nobody wants. But rocks, she said, rocks hold the truth in layers, and if you're patient enough to read them, they'll tell you everything you need to survive. This is the story of Corinne Ashford and the 47 acres of cursed earth that saved her life. If stories like this one keep you company at night, take a moment and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, and it means we can keep bringing you tales worth staying awake for. Now settle in. This one starts in the rain. The steps of the Taney County Courthouse groaned beneath Corinne's boots, like they knew something she didn't. October rain came sideways that morning, sharp as needles, turning the limestone facade dark and slick. She stood on the top step, clutching a manila folder against her chest, the way a person holds a newborn, tight and terrified, aware that what she carried was both fragile and irreplaceable. Inside that folder was a property deed, 47 acres in the southern Missouri Ozarks, transferred to her name as part of a divorce settlement that had stripped away everything else. The house in Creve the Volvo, the college savings account she'd started the week each child was born, all of it absorbed into Garrett's side of the ledger, justified by lawyers who spoke in numbers so large they sounded imaginary. What Corinne received in return was dirt. $311 remained in her checking account. She knew the number exactly because she'd stared at it on her phone screen 6 times since breakfast. Each glance a small act of self-punishment, the way you press a bruise to confirm it's real. Her phone buzzed against her hip. The screen confirmed what she already knew. Garrett. 2 words glowing in the rain, a pile of rocks. Classic Corinne. She read the message once, deleted it. But deletion is not erasure, and the words stayed lodged somewhere behind her sternum, sharp-edged and familiar. 9 years of marriage had given Garrett's voice permanent residency inside her head. The successful corporate attorney who had once found her passion for hydrology charming, even exotic, something to mention at dinner parties. My wife studies underground water systems, spoken the way you describe a hobby, a quirk, something endearing precisely because it was unserious. The charm curdled around year 3 when Corinne's research position at the university started requiring field work that conflicted with Garrett's networking calendar. Someone needs to be present for the children, he'd insisted, and the word present carried the weight of an indictment, as though studying aquifers was a form of parental abandonment. She'd quit, not all at once, but in the slow, anesthetized way a person surrenders concession by concession, until the woman who once mapped watershed systems across 3 states was scheduling orthodontist appointments and ironing shirts for a man who had stopped seeing her years before she became invisible. The rain intensified. Corinne tucked the deed deeper inside her jacket and descended the courthouse steps toward the rust-spotted Honda idling at the curb. The exhaust pipe coughed gray smoke. One tail light was out. The passenger side mirror held on with the electrical tape vibrated like a nervous hand. Inside the car, her children waited. Luella sat in the front passenger seat, noise-canceling headphones clamped over her ears, hood up, arms crossed. 14 years old and already fluent in the language of resentment. She hadn't spoken a full sentence to Corinne since they'd left the apartment 3 days ago, communicating instead through sighs, eye rolls, and the occasional single syllable lobbed like a grenade into the silence. Her phone screen cast blue light across features that were becoming alarmingly beautiful in ways Lou herself hadn't noticed yet, but the world soon would, and that terrified Corinne on a level entirely separate from their current crisis. In the back seat, Theo pressed his forehead against the window, his breath fogging the glass in small rhythmic clouds. 9 years old, slight for his age, with dark eyes that absorbed everything and revealed nothing. His sketchbook lay open on his lap, the page showing an unfinished building walls, without a roof, windows, without glass. His other hand rested on the inhaler tucked into the pocket of his corduroy jacket, touching it the way some people touch a rosary for reassurance rather than immediate need. The inhaler was nearly empty. The refill would cost $87. She'd done the math the way she now did, all math as subtraction from 311. She slid behind the wheel, bringing the smell of wet pavement into the car's stale warmth. Rain drummed the roof. Nobody spoke. Then Theo's voice, soft from the back seat, careful as a boy who has learned that questions can be dangerous. "Where are we going to live now?" Corinne adjusted the rearview mirror. In it, she saw her son's face, the slight wheeze visible in the rise of his narrow shoulders, the patience in his expression that no 9-year-old should possess. Beside her, Lou gave no indication of having heard, but the slight tilt of her hooded head betrayed her. "We're going home," Corinne answered, "to our land." Lou's headphones came off. One ear only, the concession of someone who wants to listen without admitting interest. Theo's pencil resumed its motion on the sketchbook page, adding a chimney to the roofless building. A chimney that released small spirals of smoke, a home that was warm even before it was finished. The highway south wound through the Ozark foothills, each mile carrying them further from Springfield and deeper into terrain that looked like the earth itself had been crumpled and tossed aside. Limestone bluffs rose along the roadside, their layered faces exposed by decades of road cuts, each stratum a chapter of geological history. Corinne could read the way others read novels. Ordovician dolomite, Mississippian limestone, the signatures of ancient seas that had covered this land 300 million years before anyone thought to call it cursed. The hills pressed closer. Oaks and hickories crowded the roadside in full autumn display, their canopy a cathedral ceiling of copper and gold that filtered the afternoon light into something almost holy. Under different circumstances, the beauty might have offered comfort. Today, It merely underscored how far they were traveling from everything familiar. Theo fell asleep, his sketchbook sliding to the floor. His breathing steadied into a rhythm Corinne monitored without conscious thought, the way a sailor reads wind. Steady was good. Steady meant the inhaler could wait another hour. 40 minutes south of Springfield, Corinne turned onto a gravel road nearly swallowed by overgrown sumac and blackberry bramble. A wooden sign dangled from a single rusted chain, its carved letters barely legible beneath Moss Caldwell Homestead, established 1901. Someone had spray painted below it in fading red, cursed, "Keep out." Lou's headphones came off entirely, both ears. "What the hell, Mom?" "Language," Corinne murmured, though the word felt absurd given their circumstances. The driveway stretched a quarter-mile through dense post oak branches, meeting overhead to form a tunnel that swallowed the Honda in green-gold shadow. Gravel popped beneath the tires. Then the trees parted, and the Caldwell homestead revealed itself. Craftsmen in design the house must have been handsome ones. Low-pitched roof with deep eaves, a broad front porch supported by tapered stone columns, the bones of thoughtful architecture visible beneath decades of neglect, the way a face retains its structure beneath age. But time and abandonment had done thorough work. Clapboards hung loose like broken teeth. The porch sagged at its center, a visible frown. Two upstairs windows gaped open, plastic sheeting flapping in the wind. The roof dipped alarmingly above the kitchen, a concavity that spoke of water damage reaching deep into the house's skeleton. Behind the house, overgrown fields climbed toward a wooded ridgeline. A barn with paint weathered to the pink of old scars. A lean-to shed listing hard to the east, what might have been a root cellar, half buried in the hillside, all standing, all barely. "You're kidding." Lou's voice was flat drained of even the energy required for anger. "You actually dragged us to a ruin." Corinne opened her mouth to deliver the reassurance. She'd rehearsed the optimistic framing about potential and fresh starts. But the words disintegrated before they reached her lips, dissolved by the gap between what she'd imagined and what stood before her. The house was worse than the photos, worse than the county assessor's description. Theo woke, pressed his face to the glass. His breath fogged the window, and in the clearing patch he traced a shape with his fingertip, a small circle. "A stone? Is this ours?" His voice carried something Corinne hadn't expected. Not disappointment, not fear. Wonder, fragile and tentative, the kind a child extends toward the world when he hasn't yet learned to protect himself from it. "All 47 acres, Corinne confirmed, and the crack in her voice surprised her because it came not from despair, but from the sudden understanding that this child saw possibility where his sister saw ruin, and that perhaps one of them was right. They unloaded in the rain. The front door opened with a skeleton key that turned with a solid clunk, the mechanism still faithful after years of disuse. The foyer smelled of dust and damp wood, and the particular stillness of rooms where no one has breathed in a very long time. A staircase rose to the second floor, its banister carved with simple geometric patterns. A living room with a stone fireplace, soot-stained but intact. A kitchen with avocado green appliances. A porcelain sink streaked with rust, and a heavy oak table buried under fallen ceiling plaster, its surface scarred but solid. Corinne tried the faucet. The pipe shuddered, a deep intestinal groan, but nothing emerged. She tried the light switch. Nothing. Each failed attempt accumulated like evidence in a case being built against her judgment. At the foot of the porch steps, Theo paused, crouched, and picked up a small gray stone from the gravel, roughly the size of a walnut. He turned it in his fingers with the concentration he usually reserved for his drawings, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. Through the thin upstairs wall, Corinne heard Lou's phone call. She's insane. Literally insane. We're living in a haunted house with no electricity. Dad, you have to do something. The words landed like blows because they carried the specific weight of truth. No electricity, no running water, a compromised roof. Structural damage she could not afford to fix. That first night they slept together in the master bedroom. A nest of blankets and pillows that transformed the bare room into something approaching shelter. The camping lantern cast shadows that climbed the walls like living things. Lou lay on the far edge, her back to her mother, as distant as space allowed. Theo curled against Corinne's side, one hand in his pocket, fingers wrapped around the gray stone. The house settled around them, each creak a negotiation between wood and gravity. Wind found the gaps and played them, producing low whistles that rose and fell with the gusts. Sometime after midnight, rain intensified. A new drip started directly above them, cold water landing near Theo's feet. Corinne repositioned the cooler to catch it. When she returned, Lou had shifted during the disturbance. Not toward her mother, the pride of 14 wouldn't permit that, but toward Theo. The blanket that had been bunched on Lou's side was now spread across her brother's legs, covering the spot where the drip had landed. Precise, deliberate, performed in feigned sleep. Corinne lay back down, and for the first time since the courthouse steps, she felt something other than fear. Not hope, exactly. Something quieter. The recognition that even in anger, even in the dark, her daughter's first instinct was still to protect. Dawn arrived as the slow retreat of darkness, revealing damage with clinical honesty, water stains mapping the ceiling like brown continents. The kitchen floor partially collapsed near the refrigerator, but Corinne's hydrologist's eye caught other things too. The limestone foundation, hand-laid and still plumb after a century. The vegetation patterns in the eastern field, certain grasses clustering in ways suggesting subsurface moisture, invisible from the surface, but legible to someone trained to read the language of water. People don't build homesteads where water can't be found. Whoever settled this place in 1901 had known something later generations had forgotten. In the kitchen at the back of the deepest drawer her fingers found an envelope thick and sealed the paper heavy despite its age. Across the front, in precise, unhurried handwriting for whoever comes next. To the new keeper of this land, the soil they call barren holds more than anyone believed. The well is dry, but water waits below deeper than the old methods could reach. Trust the science. Trust your training. Trust what the rocks tell you, because rocks don't lie even when people do. My work was dismissed. My findings were buried, not by time, but by men who understood their value better than they admitted. I have left my research where it will survive, under the pantry floor. You will find the entrance. What's down there is yours now. Use it better than I was allowed to. Dorothea Caldwell. Corinne's hands trembled. A scientist had lived here, a geologist who had conducted research serious enough to require concealment, who had been silenced by forces she described with the restraint of someone choosing words from behind a wall of pain. In the narrow pantry she found the seam, a rectangular outline in the floorboards, nearly invisible. She pressed one edge and the opposite side lifted. A counterweighted trapdoor revealed wooden stairs descending into blackness. Mom Theo stood barefoot in the kitchen doorway, sketchbook under one arm. What did you find? Get the flashlight. And wake your sister. Lou came reluctantly, but even her practiced indifference fractured when the flashlight beam swept across what waited below. The cellar was not a cellar. It was a laboratory organized with a precision that made Corinne's professional respect stir. Metal shelving lined 3 walls, each shelf holding labeled rock and soil samples in glass jars arranged by location, code, and date. A drafting table covered with topographic maps and geological cross-sections protected under clear acrylic. Equipment stood in careful arrangement. A portable seismograph, core sampling tools, boxes of glass slides, reference texts with cracked spines, karst hydrology, subsurface thermal systems, geothermal resource assessment. Dorothea Caldwell had been a scientist conducting serious geological research in secret, hiding her work underground, protecting it from whatever forces had driven her away. What was she looking for? Lou was examining the maps, her flashlight tracing hand-drawn contour lines with a tension that reminded Corinne of the girl she used to be, the one who spent absorbed hours with coloring books before adolescence replaced precision with performance. The maps showed detailed subsurface surveys of the property, with special attention to thermal readings in the eastern section. One area was circled repeatedly, annotated in Dot's careful handwriting: geothermal anomaly, temp readings 40 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient at 240 feet, possible hydrothermal spring system. A geothermal spring beneath the property. Not just any water, but heated mineral water rising from deep geological formations, rare in the Ozarks, potentially extraordinary. If Dot's readings were accurate, the land everyone called cursed might be sitting on top of something remarkable. Theo had found a jar collection. He withdrew his own small grey stone, holding it beside the labeled specimens, comparing a child's instinct, recognizing kinship between his accidental treasure and a scientist's deliberate collection. "Look, Mom, mine looks like these." Before Corinne could respond, a sound from above froze all three of them. Tires on gravel, then a car door closing with the expensive thud of quality engineering. Through the kitchen window, Corinne saw two vehicles, a black SUV bearing the county seal, a silver sedan with government plates. A woman emerged, mid-40s, pantsuit, clipboard. From the sedan, a man with a camera began photographing every visible deficiency. "Miss Ashford." The woman's smile was professional and empty, the smile of someone trained to deliver difficult news without personal investment. "I'm Diane Kurtz from Taney County Child Protective Services. We received a report expressing concern about the welfare of two minor children at this address." Corinne didn't need to ask who had made the call. The timing was surgical. Garrett's text, Lou's phone call, and now this, a cascade of consequence designed to arrive before she'd had time to address a single deficiency. The man she'd married had always excelled at strategy, and this bore his fingerprints the way a crime scene bears evidence. The inspection was thorough, the way surgery is thorough, and just as painful. Kurtz moved through the house with her clipboard, while the photographer documented every failure with the dispassionate efficiency of someone building a case file. No running water, no electricity, structural compromise visible in the kitchen floor and the sagging roof, broken windows admitting weather, active water intrusion in multiple rooms, no smoke detectors, no carbon monoxide detectors, no adequate heating for the approaching winter. The kitchen had no functioning stove until the propane connection, which Kurtz noted, had not been inspected by a licensed gas fitter. She asked about school enrollment, medical records, financial resources, food supply, emergency contacts. Each question delivered with clinical precision, each answer insufficient against the standard being applied. Corinne watched her life reduced to check marks on a form, each one a small wound, each one accurate. Message for Ashford. I'll be direct. This property fails to meet minimum habitability standards for minor children. You have 30 days to address critical safety requirements, including but not limited to running water, reliable electricity, structural repairs, weatherization, and professional inspections of all utility connections. If these conditions aren't met, we will be obligated to recommend temporary alternative placement for your children. 30 days. An impossible timeline backed by an unbearable consequence. After the officials departed, Lou's voice came from the doorway, stripped of its armor. "Will they actually take us?" Both children stood together in the door frame. Lou's hand on Theo's shoulder, his hand in his pocket around the grey stone, not posed, just drawn together by gravity of fear into a configuration that said everything about what mattered and what didn't. No. The word came out hard-forged in the furnace that the last 5 minutes had lit beneath her ribs. We have 30 days, and we have this land, and Dorothea Caldwell left us a road map. We just have to follow it. As if testing her conviction, another vehicle appeared through the tree line, not government-issued, a red Ford pickup paint oxidized to the color of dried clay, a toolbox bolted to the bed, a generator secured with ratchet straps behind the cab. The man who emerged moved, the way old trees move in wind, slow and deliberate, rooted in patience. Younger people mistake for frailty. 70s at least. Weathered face, white hair, cropped close. Pale blue eyes set deep beneath a brow that looked carved from the same limestone as the courthouse. Canvas work pants, flannel shirt with sleeves rolled despite the chill boots resoled more than once. You'd be the new owner, not a question. Voice like gravel, turning in a drum. I'm Haskell Greer. My wife Bettina and I have the property north of yours. Been bordering this land for 40 years. He shook each child's hand with grave formality that children recognize and respect instinctively. His eyes paused on Theo's sketchbook, then on the pocket where the stone was visible against the corduroy. He brought a cast-iron Dutch oven of Bettina's stew, the cast-iron seasoned black by decades of use, and a propane tank for the kitchen stove. The stew smelled of rosemary and slow patience, the kind of cooking that can't be hurried because the ingredients won't allow it. Know what you've taken on here. His gesture encompassed the sagging roof, the broken windows, the property's accumulated neglect, the weight of a history that included not just abandonment, but active suppression. This land hasn't produced for anybody in 35 years. People say the Caldwell woman cursed it. Others say it was cursed long before that. I'm a hydrologist. I have some ideas about what's really happening with the water on this property. Something stirred behind those pale eyes. Not surprise, recognition, as if a piece of information he'd been holding for years had suddenly found its corresponding edge. He paused at his truck door and looked at Theo, who had crouched to claim a second stone from the gravel, this one flat and dark, streaked with something that caught the fading light. Boy's got an eye for rocks. He gets it from me. The words carried more pride than Corinne had permitted herself in years. That evening the propane stove hissed to life and warmth filled the kitchen for the first time in decades. They ate Bettina's stew at the scarred oak table by camping lantern. For 20 minutes nobody mentioned the leaking roof or the CPS deadline. Theo arranged his 2 stones beside his plate. Lou asked the first question she directed at her brother in 2 days. Why do you keep those? Because they were here before us, and they'll be here after. They're like proof that this place is real. Lou reached across, picked up the darker stone, turned it in her own fingers. The lantern light found a mineral streak, and for an instant it glinted like a vein of something precious. She set it back without comment, but she didn't put her headphones on for the rest of the evening. Later, after the children slept, Corinne descended to the laboratory alone. The flashlight beam played across Dot's maps, and for the first time since the divorce proceedings began, she felt the old professional hunger stir in her chest. Not the domesticated version she'd carried through years of carpool schedules, but the raw thing, the appetite that had driven her through graduate school and across 3 states of field work. She spent 2 hours reading Dot's survey notes, cross-referencing thermal data with geological formation maps, building in her mind a 3-dimensional model of what lay beneath this land. The science was meticulous. Dot had measured, recorded, verified and measured again with the discipline of a researcher who knew her work would be challenged and wanted it to be unassailable. On one margin, Dot had written contacted J. Whitfield, independent driller, honest man, only one who listened. Corinne traced the name with her fingertip, a thread connecting past to present one woman's trusted contact, preserved across the decades like a fossil in stone. The next morning Haskell returned with the generator heavy-gauge extension cord and Bettina holding a basket of biscuits and strong coffee. The generator coughed to life on the 3rd pull, when Corinne flipped the kitchen switch light, filled the room for the first time in decades. Theo clapped. Lou retreated upstairs with a biscuit in each hand, unwilling to admit she'd been watching. Haskell spent that morning assessing rather than repairing. He moved through the property with a carpenter's eye, tapping walls, testing joists, cataloging what could be saved and what couldn't. The roof was his first priority. When Lou emerged, drawn by restlessness, Haskell handed her a hammer without looking up. "Hold this tarp edge. Pull it tight when I say." Lou drove the first nail, crooked the second, bent the third straight and flush. Haskell inspected the third nail, said nothing, handed her 3 more. By noon she'd developed a blister she examined with something approaching pride. Corinne tracked down Jonas Whitfield, the name from Dot's map margin, the independent driller, the only one who listened. The bait shop owner in Forsyth knew the name immediately. Jonas Whitfield, retired mostly, lives past Kirbyville on the old state road, still has his rig, stubborn cuss, turned down Caulfield money 3 separate times. The mention of Caulfield tightened something in Corinne's chest. A name she was beginning to understand carried weight in this county, the way geological strata carry the weight of everything above them. Jonas Whitfield's property announced its owner's profession: drill pipe stacked in neat ranks along a fence line, a drilling rig on a flatbed, tarped but maintained with evident care, core sample boxes labeled with the same methodical precision Corinne had seen in Dot's laboratory. The man himself emerged, wiping hands on a rag, tall, broad-shouldered, despite the stoop of years, with a face the sun had worked on until it resembled the terrain he'd spent his life drilling through. He listened without interruption until she mentioned Dorothea Caldwell's name. Then something shifted, not his posture, but the quality of his attention, the way a seismograph needle moves when vibration reaches it from a great distance. Dot Caldwell. His voice carried the weight of a name spoken by someone who had held it privately for a very long time. Haven't heard that name out loud in years. Folks around here pretend she never existed. Corinne described the laboratory, the thermal readings, her professional assessment of what Dot had mapped. She did not mention her financial situation or the $311. This negotiation required competence, not vulnerability. I drilled 3 test holes for Dot in 76. Shallow ones, limited equipment. Never reached what she believed was down there. She had the data to back it. Then Caulfield's people came around, and suddenly nobody would lease me equipment, nobody would sell me fuel, and Dot was being called crazy from here to Jefferson City. He folded his rag into a precise square, the gesture of a man who maintains order in small things when larger things have gone wrong. He studied Corinne's face with the directness of someone who had spent his career evaluating whether ground would hold. Modern rig can go deeper. Diamond tip bits for the hard layers. If Dot's readings were accurate, and I never had reason to doubt her data, only the reach of my equipment you'd need about 240 feet to reach whatever's generating that heat signature. The geology supports it. Ozark karst systems can channel thermal water from remarkable depths when the right fracture pathways exist. I'll drill on contingency. We reach water, you pay me over 3 years. We don't, I eat the cost. Because Dot Caldwell was the best field geologist I ever met, and what happened to her was wrong, and I've spent 40 years knowing it and doing nothing. That's a debt that doesn't expire. In the days before Jonas arrived with his rig, small kindnesses accumulated the way water gathers in stone. A box of canning jars on the porch, preserved vegetables, no note. Firewood materialized beside the barn split and seasoned, stacked with the care of someone who understood that warmth is a form of language. Children's winter clothing appeared on the mailbox in a plastic bag from friends. Welcome in the Ozarks help arrived unnamed, offered as participation in a system of mutual obligation so old it predated the communities that practiced it. Bettina Greer became a quiet constant. She appeared most mornings with some necessity disguised as neighborliness, a pot of soup, a bag of apples from her trees, once a box of candles when a storm threatened the power. She never commented on the house's condition or Corinne's circumstances with anything other than practical response. When Corinne tried to thank her, Bettina waved the words away with a hand that had kneaded bread and patched fences and written 40 years of Christmas cards. That's what neighbors do. Don't make it more than it is. Theo thrived in ways that startled Corinne. The ghost-quiet boy from Springfield became animated, cataloging stones with the systematic enthusiasm of a born naturalist, filling his sketchbook with detailed drawings of mineral patterns and geological formations he found around the property. His breathing improved in the clean Ozark air, the inhaler appearing less frequently in his hand. His teacher sent home a note Theo shared his rock collection during science time. He explained geological layering to the class with remarkable clarity. He has a gift for explaining things. Lou's transformation was subtler, expressed in the gradual abandonment of her headphones, the questions she began asking Haskell about joints and joists and load-bearing walls. She developed a vocabulary of construction that replaced the vocabulary of complaint. She never said the farm was acceptable, but she stopped calling it a ruin. And one afternoon Corinne found her sitting on the porch steps, sketching the ridgeline in Theo's spare sketchbook, though she closed it quickly when she realized she'd been seen. Jonas arrived on the fourth morning with a rig that dwarfed every vehicle the property had seen. The flatbed groaned up the driveway and positioned itself over the first site Dot had marked, the eastern field where the grass grew thickest. Drilling drew spectators the way unusual events always do in rural communities, pickup trucks lining the gravel road, men in work boots leaning against fenders with coffee thermoses, observing with the careful neutrality of people who had watched this land disappoint before. The drill bit into Ozark limestone, with a sound like the earth being asked a question it wasn't sure it wanted to answer. Jonas operated with concentration so absolute it resembled meditation, his hands reading the rig's vibrations the way a doctor reads a pulse. At 100 feet limestone, at 150 more limestone, interlaced with bands of chert, the drill's pitch changing as it met each new layer. Corinne monitored the cuttings that emerged pale chips of ancient seabed, reading each handful the way she'd once read core samples in her university lab. At 180, the drill ceased. A metallic shriek that split the morning silence and sent Jonas lunging for the kill switch. The rig shuddered, groaned, and the motor died with a cough of diesel exhaust. Hit a chert nodule. Flint hard sitting right in the drill path, bits cracked. The replacement diamond tip would require a full day to source from Springfield. The spectators departed with the particular quiet of people confirmed in low expectations. Caldwell's curse. Same as always, their trucks raised dust that settled over the property like a verdict. That evening Lou stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, watching her mother study Dot's maps by lamplight. So that's it. We just quit because of one rock. We don't quit. We adjust. Dot's maps show 2 potential drilling sites. Tomorrow, I'm identifying the second. Corinne spent that night in the laboratory, tracing Dot's survey lines until she found a secondary thermal signature near the dry creek bed along the southern boundary. A margin note in Dot's handwriting read, "Southern approach may bypass chert layer. Deeper but cleaner path." The rig repositioned at the secondary site near the dry creek bed where the land dipped toward the southern boundary. This time the limestone yielded differently. Smoother progress through layers that told their own story to anyone trained to read them. Corinne stood beside the rig for hours, monitoring the cuttings, reading each handful of pulverized stone the way she'd once read core samples in her university laboratory. Her professional training engaged at an intensity she hadn't experienced since before her marriage had anesthetized her professional identity, and with it came a feeling she'd nearly forgotten the particular joy of competence applied to meaningful work. At 200 feet they hit the clay cap Dot had documented. Dense blue-gray, nearly impermeable, a geological seal laid down by ancient processes with the patience of a planet that measures time in epochs. The barrier that had trapped whatever lay beneath for millennia. This was why the land appeared dry, not because water was absent, but because it was imprisoned beneath a layer of clay so dense that conventional wells had never reached through it. Every failed well on the Caldwell property, every dry bore that had reinforced the legend of the curse, had simply stopped too soon. At 238 feet, the drill dropped. Not catastrophically, but a sudden smooth descent, as if the earth had opened a door it had been holding closed. Jonas cut the motor. In the silence, everyone heard it, the grinding of steel against yielding stone, a different sound entirely from what had come before. Jonas lowered a measurement tool into the bore, waited, extracted it slowly, then looked at Corinne with an expression that rearranged every weathered line of his face. "Your water, Dr. Ashford, and it's warm." The pump engaged. For seconds that felt geological in duration, nothing happened. Then water arced from the test pipe in a crystalline parabola, catching the afternoon light and fracturing it into spectrum. Not cold groundwater, but warm, mineral-rich, faintly sulphurous, rising from depths where the earth's own heat had held it for centuries beyond counting. Steam curled where it hit the cool ground, creating wisps of vapor, like visible proof that what had been buried was now free. Theo reached the puddle first, plunged both hands into warm water, and came up holding pale, smooth stones coated with mineral deposits that caught the light with an opalescent shimmer. "Mom, these are warm. The rocks are warm." Corinne took one from his palm, siliceous sinter, evidence of a hydrothermal system, rare, significant, the kind of feature that attracted scientific interest and inevitably commercial appetite. Haskell appeared at her shoulder, his voice low, meant only for her. "Put those in your pocket and don't show them to anyone else today." The warning carried the weight of a man who had seen what happened when valuable things were discovered by people without the power to protect them. Corinne closed her hand around the warm stone and slid it into her jacket beside Dot's letter. That evening, a vehicle appeared that no one had invited. A black Range Rover, polished to a mirror finish that looked offensive against the property's honest dirt. Warren Caulfield emerged the way certain men emerge from expensive vehicles, with the assumption that their arrival reorganizes the priorities of everyone present. 60s, silver-haired, a physique maintained by expenditure rather than labor. His smile preceded him up the driveway like an advance team. Haskell's hand found Corinne's arm. "Be firm. Be careful. Miss Ashford, congratulations on your water discovery. News travels in a small county. I've had an interest in this parcel for some time. Given the improved water situation, I'd like to offer 40,000 for the property. Cash immediate closing. You could be in a proper home within the week. 40,000. Large enough to solve every immediate problem. Small enough. Corinne now understood with the clarity of a scientist reading data to constitute insult. The property's geological value, if Dot's readings were accurate, was orders of magnitude greater than anything Caulfield was offering. That's generous, Mr. Caulfield, but this is our home. Caulfield's smile didn't waver, but something behind it recalculated. Homes require maintenance, Miss Ashford. Financial resources that, forgive me, may be challenging given your current circumstances. I understand there's been some concern about the children's living conditions. My offer provides stability, security for your children, a fresh start somewhere more suitable. The word suitable landed like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples carrying implications about who belonged where, about what kind of woman could claim this land and keep it. The word carried the same frequency as Garrett's classic Corinne, the assumption that she was a temporary occupant of a situation that exceeded her capacity. Haskell spoke from behind her, his voice quiet, dense with carefully chosen words. Think carefully about what you're buying, Warren, and what you're selling. Something passed between the two men that Corinne couldn't fully decipher, but could feel old history compressed into a single exchange of glances. After Caulfield departed, Haskell remained on the porch, staring at the eastern field, where evening shadow was climbing the ridge. The quality of his silence had changed. It was no longer the comfortable quiet of a man who preferred action to speech. It was the pressurized silence of someone preparing to release something heavy. I worked for his father, 20 years in the quarries. Good wages, steady work, and I kept my mouth shut the way a man does when his family depends on the paycheck. I was there when Dot Caldwell brought her findings to the county geological office, watched her present her data with the kind of precision that should have earned respect. Instead, she got smiles that meant nothing and promises that led nowhere. I was there when Caulfield Sr. made the phone calls that got her laughed out of the room, and I was there, God help me, when they vandalized her equipment and salted her sample sites so her data couldn't be replicated. He turned to Corinne, and in the fading light, his face held an expression she recognized from her own mirror during the worst months of her marriage. The particular exhaustion of a person who has carried a wrong they participated in. I said nothing, signed their settlement, took their money, kept their secrets, told myself it wasn't my business, that I was just a quarry worker, that dot science was beyond my understanding. But I understood enough. I understood that a woman who was right about everything was being punished for it, and I stood by and let it happen. That's what I've carried for 40 years. Every time I looked at this property, I remembered. The confession hung in the cooling air like vapor from the warm spring below. Haskell was giving her what he'd withheld from Dot. Witness, testimony, truth spoken aloud where previously it had only rotted in silence. It was ammunition, not absolution, and he knew the difference. Days compressed into labor and progress. The well reached full operation, delivering clean mineral-rich water that tested at temperatures confirming Dot's thermal readings. Haskell coordinated repairs with the efficiency of a man accustomed to organizing work crews. Lou's competence with tools grew from accidental to purposeful, her questions to Haskell evolving from basic to structural. But the 30-day clock kept counting each day, a subtraction from the margin between survival and catastrophe. The notification arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a sheriff's deputy to the porch, where Lou was sanding a railing she'd cut and fitted herself. The deputy handed the papers with the apologetic efficiency of someone performing a duty he took no pleasure in, nodded once, and returned to his cruiser. Emergency custody hearing, expedited 5 days. Garrett's petition included language about maternal fixation on geological fantasies to the detriment of children's welfare, parenting judgment compromised by financial desperation and an environment characterized by pseudoscientific delusion rather than stability. The phrasing was Garrett's polished to the high sheen of legal prose, but the strategy smelled of Caulfield pressure applied at the exact point of vulnerability. Lou held the railing she'd been sanding. Her knuckles whitened. She didn't ask what the papers said. The deputy's face had told her enough. That night, Corinne descended to the laboratory after midnight, seeking not data but company, the presence of a woman who had stood on this same ground and been destroyed by the same forces. Footsteps on the cellar stairs. Lou descended in bare feet, her face stripped of daytime composure, and what remained was young. Terribly, unmistakably young. "Show me." Her voice was quiet, scraped clean of attitude. "I want to understand what she found, what you're fighting for." In a hidden room beneath a condemned farmhouse, in the small hours of a night that carried rain and fear in equal measure, a mother taught her daughter to read a geological survey. She traced contour lines with her finger, explaining how each one represented a depth where temperature or mineral composition changed. She described thermal signatures, the way heat rising from deep in the earth left readable patterns in the layers above, the way a fever leaves evidence in a body even after the temperature breaks. She described how water moves through limestone, the way stories move through families, finding cracks following gravity, emerging in unexpected places. How the Ozarks were built on karst geology, a landscape of hidden rivers and dissolved caverns, where the surface told you almost nothing about what moved beneath. How Dot had spent years mapping what no one else could see, trusting instruments over opinions, data over dismissal. Lou listened with focused intensity. Corinne remembered from the girl she used to be the one who asked questions about everything and listened to the answers as though they mattered more than anything else in the world. This is what you used to do before Dad. Lou's observation contained within it a reckoning with the years. Her mother had been something other than herself. Not an accusation exactly, more like the recognition that something valuable had been lost, and she was only now understanding what it was. Yes, this is what I do. Lou reached into her pocket and produced to Corinne's surprise a stone. The dark flat one, streaked with mineral, that Theo had found their first evening, the one Lou had picked up by lantern light and supposedly set back. She hadn't set it back. She'd kept it. She placed it on the drafting table beside Dot's labeled specimens. Her own act of addition to a collection spanning 3 women and 40 years. In the silence, something fractured began to set, the way bones set, imperfectly with ache but toward wholeness. They climbed the stairs together, settled into the blanket nest closer than they'd been since arriving. Corinne was nearly asleep when Lou whispered, "Mom, if we lose the hearing, do we lose this place too? We're not going to lose." The words came out steady, but in the darkness, Corinne held Dot's letter and the warm stone so tightly the edges pressed marks into her palm. Proof that the earth keeps what it promises. Proof that truth once buried doesn't stay buried forever. The remaining days compressed into parallel motion, repairing by day and preparing by night. Haskell's network proved wider than his quiet demeanor suggested. A licensed electrician from Branson certified the upgraded wiring. A structural engineer from Ava signed a document declaring the house fundamentally sound. Each certification relied on goodwill Corinne hadn't earned yet, documents accumulated like sandbags stacked against a rising river. Renata Voss arrived at Haskell's call, a mineral rights attorney with silver-streaked hair and a briefcase that had seen the inside of federal courthouses. She reviewed the situation with the focused efficiency of someone accustomed to cases where law and geology intersected. Your custody case and your property dispute are the same fight on 2 fronts. Caulfield needs you desperate enough to sell. Your ex-husband provides the desperation. The court provides the mechanism. Separate the two and both collapse. Her strategy was direct. Document every improvement with photographs and professional certifications. Build a record of community support that no court could dismiss as fabrication. Present the children's school records, their health improvements, their social integration, and file mineral rights documentation with the state, creating a legal record of the property's geological value that would make any forced sale or undervalued assessment subject to scrutiny and potential fraud investigation. She looked at Corinne over her glasses. You're not just fighting for custody, you're establishing precedent. Dorothea Caldwell had the science, but not the legal framework. We're going to give you both. Monday evening brought Garrett's rental car, to the property at dusk. He stood beside it, studying the farmhouse with an expression Corinne had never associated with her ex-husband: uncertainty. The man who had navigated corporate law with the precision of a chess grandmaster looked for the first time in their shared history like someone who had arrived at a board position he hadn't anticipated. The children were inside, Lou doing homework at the kitchen table. She'd refinished herself, the grain visible under a coat of polyurethane she'd applied with Haskell's guidance. Theo sorting his stone collection into categories from Dot's classification system, each specimen labeled on a card in his careful 9-year-old printing. Through the window, the scene looked like what it was: children at home, not performing home, being home. The distinction would not have been visible to someone who hadn't known them before, but Garrett had known them before, and the difference registered in the way he stood very still at the window before speaking. "I need to ask you something." His voice lacked its usual courtroom calibration. "The geothermal discovery, is it real?" "Yes." Garrett's jaw worked. The expression of a man recalculating a position he'd held with confidence. Caulfield approached me 6 weeks before the divorce was finalized, suggested the property settlement could include this parcel, implied it would simplify things for everyone. I didn't ask enough questions about why he wanted you to have what I believed was a worthless piece of land. The revelation rearranged everything. The property hadn't been Garrett's dismissive consolation prize. It had been Caulfield's strategic placement, put in the hands of someone he expected to sell quickly and cheaply. Something else. Garrett produced a document, the tax reassessment on your property. The valuation methodology is based on mineral surveys that aren't publicly filed. Someone provided non-public geological data to the assessor's office. That's a procedural violation significant enough to invalidate the entire reassessment. Why are you giving me this? Garrett looked through the window at his children. Because they drew pictures of this place. Theo sent me drawings every day this week. The house, the barn, the well. Lou texted me a photo of a railing she built. My daughter built something with her hands and sent me a photograph like it was the most important thing she'd ever done. He paused, and the silence between them was not the hostile silence of their marriage's end, but something different, the silence of a man recalculating. I don't know if this place is good for them, but I can see it's become theirs. And the man who manipulated our divorce for a land grab is not someone whose judgment I should have trusted about my children's welfare. It was not an apology. Garrett didn't apologize. The architecture of his personality didn't include that room, but it was something adjacent. The recognition that their children had found something on 47 acres of cursed earth that his wealth had never provided them purpose. The Taney County Courthouse in morning light glowed the pale gold of the bluffs that lined every river in the Ozarks. Corinne mounted the steps with children on either side. Theo, in his corduroy jacket pockets, waited with field samples. Lou, in a dress she'd borrowed from Bettina, calluses visible when she reached for the door. Haskell and Bettina waited in the hallway, both in church clothes. Jonas in a suit that predated his retirement. The Methodist pastor, neighbors from the work crew, a teacher from Bradleyville Elementary, people with no legal obligation to be present and every human reason. Judge Evelyn Hartwell ran her courtroom with economy and zero tolerance for wasted motion. She had the particular authority of a woman who had earned her position in a county where women rarely occupied the bench, and her gaze carried the weight of that history. Garrett's attorney presented the familiar narrative: maternal instability, documented hazards, geological fantasies endangering children's welfare, photographs from the CPS inspection, each image a frame from the worst days before water, before repairs, before any of it. The attorney described a mother who had abandoned stability for delusion, who had dragged two vulnerable children to a condemned property in pursuit of what he called, with careful emphasis, pseudoscientific mineral claims. Renata's response was surgical. Updated photographs showing the property's transformation, professional certifications from licensed tradespeople, school records showing attendance, engagement, and improved grades, a letter from Theo's pediatrician documenting improved respiratory health since moving to the property's cleaner air. Then she presented Garrett's own document, the tax reassessment based on non-public geological surveys, and watched the opposing attorney's composure fracture by one visible degree. Then the witnesses. Haskell took the stand and described repairs and the children's participation with understated authority that carried more weight than passion would have. He spoke of Lou's growing skill with tools, her initiative, her transformation from reluctant passenger to active participant in her own home's rebuilding. Bettina spoke of community integration, the relationships forming around this family like roots around stone. The pastor described Theo's contributions to the youth science program, his careful explanations of geological layering that had captivated the other children, and Lou's unexpected appearance at a Saturday volunteer project, painting a fence for an elderly congregant without being asked, arriving early, and staying until the work was finished. When the children spoke with the judge privately, they were gone 12 minutes. Theo returned smiling. Lou's eyes were bright. Neither would say what they told her, but Theo's pocket was lighter by 1 stone. She asked me why I collect them. I gave her my best one so she could understand. The gray stone, the first one from the porch steps the day they arrived, given to a stranger in a black robe because a 9-year-old believed that holding a piece of the earth could make someone understand what home means. Renata's final evidence, a video recording of Dorothea Caldwell made 7 years before her death and preserved by the County Historical Society. Silver-haired, clear-voiced, seated among bookshelves in what appeared to be a university library, she spoke with the precision of a scientist and the restrained grief of a woman who had been forced to abandon her life's work. She described her research in measured technical terms, that nonetheless carried the unmistakable authority of genuine expertise, the geothermal anomaly beneath the property, the methodology she'd employed, field measurements taken over 3 consecutive summers, cross-referenced with existing geological surveys of the region, the results that had been consistent, reproducible, and significant. And then, with a tone that shifted from scientific to personal without losing its composure, she described the campaign that ended everything. Equipment destroyed overnight, 3 seasons of monitoring stations dismantled, samples contaminated with substances that corrupted her data beyond recovery. Colleagues who had initially supported her work suddenly refusing to return her calls. A visit from Warren Caulfield Sr. in person, informing her that continued geological claims about the property would result in legal action for fraud, and that her professional reputation, already damaged by his efforts, would not survive a public trial. I left because I had no choice, but the science doesn't change because someone finds it inconvenient. What lies under that land is real, and it will still be real long after the men who buried my work are themselves buried. The recording ended. In the courtroom silence that followed, Judge Hartwell removed her glasses and looked at Garrett's attorney with an expression that required no translation. The attorney, to his credit, did not attempt to offer one. The ruling was decisive. Primary custody remained with Corinne. The court found sufficient evidence of stable housing, community support, educational continuity, and responsible parenting. The property, far from representing the hazard described in the original petition, demonstrated the respondent's resourcefulness, professional competence, and commitment to providing her children with a stable home environment. Judge Hartwell noted concerns about circumstances surrounding the original CPS referral and would be referring procedural irregularities, including the use of non-public geological data in the tax reassessment to the County Ethics Board for investigation. In the hallway, Garrett embraced his children. Theo tucked briefly against his father's chest, a gesture that belonged to an earlier version of their family, but still held. Lou permitted a hug that lasted longer than she would have allowed a week ago, her hands resting briefly on her father's back before dropping away. Then Garrett turned to Corinne, and they stood for a moment in the space where their marriage had been. And something passed between them that was neither forgiveness nor reconciliation, but might in time become the foundation for something more useful, respect perhaps, or the mutual recognition that their children had found solid ground where neither parent had expected it, and that the ground mattered more than the history standing on it. The Sunday after the hearing dawned in October, gold the kind of morning the Ozarks produce when autumn is at its peak, and the light seems to arrive from a place older than the sun. Corinne woke to sounds she didn't recognize, engines, multiple approaching from the county road. By the time she reached the porch, the driveway had become a procession. Haskell's truck led, followed by vehicles she knew and vehicles she didn't. the Methodist congregation in a caravan of sedans and pickups, neighbors from properties she'd never visited, Jonas carrying lumber instead of drill pipe, the electrician's teenage son with a tool belt of his own, the elderly man who had watched everything from the margins and said nothing until now, carrying a toolbox, wearing an expression that suggested silence was no longer sufficient. They came with materials and purpose, roofing shingles donated by a building supply company in Branson, whose owner had heard the story from someone who'd heard it from someone else, the way stories travel in small counties until they become community property. Paint in colors Bettina had chosen after consulting Lou, who had opinions about color she had known she possessed, until someone asked sage green for the shutters, cream for the trim. Window frames built by a retired carpenter who'd read about the hearing in the county weekly and decided that was enough reason to drive 40 minutes with a truck full of white oak. Haskell directed teams with quiet efficiency, deploying people according to skills he'd catalogued over decades of neighboring. Lou moved among groups with a tool belt, her competence genuine enough that adults deferred to her on questions of measurement and fit, and the deference was not charity but recognition. Theo served as runner and documentarian, carrying water and nails to wherever they were needed, his sketchbook filling with drawings of people at work, hands gripping hammers and paintbrushes, faces bent to tasks that mattered. The work had the rhythm of something older than any individual purpose. People who had driven past this property for decades without stopping were now crawling across its roof, fitting its windows, painting its walls. Something had shifted in the county's relationship with the Caldwell land, and the shift was not forgiveness for its imagined curse, but recognition that curse was just another word for neglect, and neglect could be reversed by the same thing that caused it, human choice. By late afternoon, the farmhouse had undergone a transformation no single person could have achieved. The roof was sound properly shingled, windows gleamed, the porch stood level and firm, its railings sanded and painted, the one Lou had built indistinguishable from professional work. The barn doors hung true on new tracks. Jonas shook Corinne's hand at his truck. Dot would have liked this day. She always said the land would find the right person, just had to wait long enough. Evening settled over the property in layers of amber and violet. The air smelled of fresh paint and oak smoke from the fireplace, which held its first fire in decades, the chimney drawing cleanly after Haskell's repairs. Corinne sat on the new porch steps with her children. The wood beneath them was solid, still fragrant with sawdust built by hands that belonged to this community, and now by extension to her. Theo leaned against her right side, breathing easy. No wheeze in his chest, his sketchbook open to a drawing of the house as it looked now, windows lit, smoke rising from the chimney he'd drawn weeks ago from imagination and now drew from life. Lou sat to her left knees, drawn up, calloused hands wrapped around a mug of Bettina's cider, her headphones around her neck, unused, unnecessary. Her calluses had evolved from blisters to evidence, prove that she had participated in the making of something that would outlast the making. The sounds of the Ozark evening assembled in the cooling air. A barred owl calling from the ridge, the creak of the barn's new doors settling into their tracks, and beneath all of it felt more than heard the faint hum of warm water moving through stone far beneath them, a pulse in the earth's own body. Theo reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers found what waited there and withdrew it. Small, pale, smooth. One of the geothermal stones from the well site washed clean its mineral surface, catching the last daylight with faint iridescence. Warm from his pocket, warm from the earth that made it warm from being held. He placed it on the porch railing, slid it sideways until it rested against the post Lou had built the joint tight, the nail heads flush, the paint still new. Lou glanced at the stone, then at her brother. What's that one worth? The question carried everything, the weeks of skepticism and surrender, the blisters and the fear, the midnight hours in Dot's laboratory, the courtroom where a boy gave away his best stone because he believed a judge would understand if she could hold the earth in her hand. Corinne looked at the stone on the railing. Ordinary. No jeweler would glance twice. Just a piece of the earth carried from underground by water and time, and the particular stubbornness of a planet that buries its best things and waits for someone patient enough to bring them to the surface. Everything Corinne said. The word hung in the air, simple and complete, needing nothing added. Lou leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, the first voluntary contact in months, and the weight of it was so slight and so enormous that Corinne held perfectly still, afraid that breathing might end it. Theo picked up his pencil and began a new drawing. The porch, the railing, the stone, his mother and sister leaning together in the last light. The oak tree holding its fire against the coming dark. The fields rising toward the ridge where the forest stood in its ancient patience, and beneath all of it, invisible but present, the warm water moving through channels carved by time, carrying minerals and heat, and the particular persistence of things that endure because they must, because the earth does not give up on what it holds, even when the surface looks barren, even when the world calls it cursed, even when decades pass before someone arrives who knows how to listen. The light faded, the fire crackled inside. The owl called from the ridge, and this time another answered from the barn. A conversation across distance, the oldest language, the simplest message. You are here. I am here. That is enough. And now I'd like to ask you something. Think about your own life, the place where you feel most yourself. Is it somewhere grand, somewhere others would admire? Or is it a small, ordinary corner of the world that became extraordinary simply because you chose it and stayed? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this one stayed with you, do me a small kindness and share it with someone who might need to hear it tonight. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll meet you here next time with another story worth carrying. Good night.